Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
For about 5 years now, I've been working remotely and bouncing between countries every few months. It started after I quit my corporate job in Seattle. I was tired of the cubicle life, the gray skies, and the feeling that I was wasting my 20s in conference rooms. So I saved up, taught myself web design and development, built up a client base, and took the leap. My parents thought I was crazy at first, but they came around when they saw I was actually making it work. The family dynamics are complicated. My parents are supportive. My younger brother thinks I'm living the dream, but then there's my aunt. She's always been the type to show up uninvited to family gatherings and make everything about herself. At my college graduation, she spent the whole dinner complaining about her back pain. At my brother's wedding, she wore white and told everyone the bride wasn't good enough for our family. But we all just tolerated it because, well, that's what you do with family, right? I've been planning the Thailand trip for months. I found this amazing opportunity to work with a startup based in Bangkok while maintaining my freelance clients. The cost of living was cheap, the food was incredible, and I'd always wanted to experience Southeast Asia. I made all the arrangements, paid my mortgage for 6 months in advance, set up automatic bill payments, and asked my neighbor to keep an eye on the place. When I told everyone at a family barbecue, most people were excited for me. My mom was worried but proud. My dad asked about the work visa situation. My brother wanted to know if I'd try weird foods and send him pictures. Then my aunt chimed in. She asked who was watching my house and my stuff. The way she said stuff made my skin crawl. Her eyes had this gleam in them. I told her my neighbor agreed to check on things and asked why she wanted to know. She said it seemed risky, leaving everything unattended for so long, and that things could happen. I brushed it off and said it would be fine, that people do this all the time. Then she offered to stay at my place if I needed someone from the family to watch it. I thanked her, but told her I had it covered. I should have known something was off right then, but I was too excited about the trip to think much of it. Thailand was everything I hoped for. I found a small apartment in a neighborhood full of locals, away from the tourist traps. My days fell into this perfect rhythm: wake up early, work for a few hours, break for lunch at a street food stall, work some more, then explore in the evenings. I tried everything from pad thai to som tam to these little grilled squid skewers that the vendor near my place made. I was happy. Actually, genuinely happy. Then 3 months in, my phone rang at 2 in the morning. It was my neighbor. He apologized for calling so late but said my aunt was at my house and claimed she was moving in. I sat up in bed, confused and half asleep. I asked what he meant by moving in because it didn't make sense. He explained that she'd shown up with a locksmith and said she was family and had a right to stay there. He'd told her she needed to call me first, but she wasn't listening. I asked if she was inside my house right then. He said the locksmith was changing the locks right then. I was fully awake now, heart pounding. I told him not to let her take anything and said I was calling her right away. I hung up and immediately dialed her number. She picked up on the third ring, sounding way too cheerful. She said she was going to call me tomorrow and mentioned she was at my place. I demanded to know what she thought she was doing. She said she was just making sure everything was all right. She explained that I wasn't using the house and my cousin needed a place to stay while her house was getting fumigated. She acted like it was no big deal, saying it was better to have family there than let it sit empty. I told her she couldn't just break into my house because I didn't give her permission. She laughed and said she wasn't breaking in, that she was family and helping me out. I warned her to leave now or I'd call the police. She laughed at that too. She told me to go ahead because the police wouldn't do anything since she was family. Then she mentioned she'd already changed the locks for security purposes and said I should thank her. I gave her 10 minutes to leave or I'd press charges. She asked if I would really dare do that and wondered what my mother would say. I hung up and called the police, explaining the whole situation to the dispatcher. Then I called my neighbor back and told him the police were on their way. I asked if he could stay outside and make sure she didn't leave with anything. He said he was already on it and was recording everything from his porch just in case. The next hour was a blur of phone calls. The police arrived and I spoke to an officer who took my statement. My aunt apparently put on a whole performance, saying she was just worried about my house and that it was her family duty to make sure everything was okay. She told them I was halfway around the world and she was protecting my property. The officer told her the property owner didn't want her there and she needed to leave. She insisted it was ridiculous and that they couldn't arrest family for caring. When the officer said they'd have to remove her if she didn't leave voluntarily, she refused to go anywhere. That's when my neighbor called again and I could hear the panic in his voice. He said she was loading stuff into her car and he could see boxes. It looked like my television, the laptop I'd left behind, and maybe some other electronics. He thought he saw her carrying something that looked like a cash box. My stomach dropped. She wasn't there to watch my house. She was robbing me. I told him to inform the officers what he was seeing. He did. Within minutes, they stopped her from loading anything else. They found my laptop, a tablet, some jewelry that belonged to my grandmother, and about $800 in cash that I'd left in a safe. When the officer called me back, he asked if I wanted to press charges. I said absolutely. He warned me that this was a family member and asked if I was sure. I told him she broke into my house and tried to steal from me, so yes, I was sure. My aunt was arrested. I got updates from my neighbor, who seemed almost giddy about the drama. Apparently, she screamed the whole way to the police car about how ungrateful I was and how she'd only been trying to help. The next few days were chaos. My phone didn't stop ringing. Some relatives understood. My parents were horrified and apologetic. My brother said he'd always known she was trouble, but others were furious with me. My uncle called and asked how I could do this to family. I explained that she broke into my house and tried to steal from me. He said she made a mistake and I didn't have to involve the police. One of my cousins said I was tearing the family apart over material things. I shot back that no, she did that when she committed a crime. The court case was straightforward. She tried to claim she had implied permission, but the changed locks, the stolen items, and my neighbor's testimony made it clear to what really happened. She got 300 hours of community service and had to pay a fine of $5,000, plus restitution for the locksmith I had to hire to change everything again. She sent me a letter afterward saying she was sorry, but honestly, it just felt like words on paper. There was no real acknowledgement of what she'd done, just a lot of excuses about being stressed and misunderstanding the situation. I'm still in Thailand. My house is fine. My neighbor watches it like a hawk now, and I gave him a key for emergencies. Real emergencies. My aunt and I don't talk anymore. I needed a job after high school and didn't know what else to do with my life. My dad had been military, my uncle too, and it seemed like a decent path. Plus, I needed structure and discipline, or so everyone kept telling me. After basic training, I got assigned to work on vehicles in a motor pool unit. I wasn't complaining, and I liked working with my hands, and vehicles made sense to me in a way that people sometimes didn't. Our unit had this weird staffing situation where we ended up with 3 staff sergeants when we really only needed 2. My first sergeant was a platoon sergeant who ran everything and stayed out of the day-to-day motor pool operations. Then there was Sergeant T, who was in his last year before retirement. They'd created a fake position for him called Motor Supply Sergeant, so he could coast to the finish line without doing much. He was a good guy, always fair, never made anyone's life harder than it needed to be. Then there was Sergeant G. He was the maintenance supervisor, which meant he oversaw all the preventative maintenance and repairs for every vehicle we had. The guy was a stickler for procedure, which isn't always bad in the military, but he took it to another level. He didn't want to hear explanations or context. If the paperwork said something, that's all that mattered to him. Every Monday was the same routine. The vehicle operators would roll into the motor pool to do their weekly inspections. We mechanics would handle the quick fixes right there. Stuff like changing burnt-out bulbs or tightening loose panels. Anything that could get a vehicle back out the door fast. After that, we'd tackle the serious problems, the deadline deficiencies that meant a vehicle couldn't be operated safely without risking bigger damage. By Friday, we'd usually put in orders for whatever parts we needed for the remaining repairs. This one week, I lucked out with an easy workload. By Wednesday, I'd finished everything on my inspection sheets except for one vehicle with a deadline deficiency. The problem was, that vehicle wasn't even here. The operators had taken it out every single day that week because their unit was short on vehicles and had too much work. I called over there to tell them they needed to bring it back, but they kept stalling. I told my squad leader about the situation and figured that was that. I'd done my part. Since my other work was done, I headed to the office to start ordering parts for the vehicles that needed them. When I finished that, I planned to help out the other mechanics with their workload. That's just how we did things. We looked out for each other. I was at the desk going through parts catalogs when Sergeant G walked in. He asked me why I was in the office instead of out working on vehicles. I explained that I'd finished all my work for the week and was just ordering parts now. He told me to hand over my inspection sheets so he could check them himself. I gave them to him and he started flipping through the pages. I could see him getting to the one with a deadline deficiency. I tried to explain about that vehicle, but he cut me off and said he'd see what the paper said. He found it, and his jaw tightened immediately. He demanded to know why it wasn't fixed and ordered me to get out there and repair the vehicle right away. I attempted to explain that the vehicle wasn't even here, that the operators had taken it because their unit was short on vehicles. He interrupted me again and said he didn't want to hear my excuses. He wanted me out on the line fixing that truck. I tried one more time to make him understand the situation, but he cut me off a third time. He told me that if he saw me doing anything else before that truck was fixed, he'd give me an Article 15. An Article 15 meant non-judicial punishment. That could mean losing rank or having pay taken away. My stomach dropped, but I knew better than to keep arguing. I acknowledged his order and told him I was on it. I walked straight to the rack where we kept all the vehicle manuals. I pulled the right one, found the technical specs for the part that needed replacing, and looked up the bolt sizes. I grabbed the appropriate wrenches, walked out to the spot where that vehicle was supposed to be parked, and got to work. Except the vehicle wasn't there, just empty pavement. I laid down on the ground right there in that empty parking spot, held my wrenches up in the air, and started making wrenching motions like I was turning bolts. Back and forth, back and forth. Those were some heavy wrenches too, so I had to take breaks every few minutes to rest my arms. I did this for over an hour. People started noticing. I could see mechanics walking by, doing double takes, pointing at me. Some of them looked confused. Others were trying not to laugh. I just kept wrenching the air, completely deadpan serious about it. Eventually, someone must have gone to Sergeant T because he came walking over. He stood there watching me for a minute or two, his head tilted to the side like he was trying to figure out if I'd lost my mind. He asked me what I was doing. I told him I was fixing the truck because it had a deadline deficiency. He looked at me like I'd been out in the sun too long. He pointed out that I did realize the truck wasn't actually here, right? I explained that I knew that and he knew that, but Sergeant G didn't want to hear my excuses. Sergeant G wanted me out on the line fixing this truck, so that's what I was doing. Sergeant T stared at me for a long moment. Then I saw it click in his head. The corner of his mouth twitched. He told me to get up and get back to my regular work. I reminded him with all due respect that Sergeant G had threatened me with an Article 15 if I did anything else before this truck was fixed. Sergeant T said he'd take care of it and told me to go take a smoke break. I didn't smoke, but I walked over to the smoking area anyway and stood there for about 15 minutes. I figured that would give them enough time to sort things out. When I came back to the office to finish ordering parts, Sergeant G was sitting at his desk with the deepest scowl I'd ever seen on his face. He didn't say a word to me, didn't even look up. I sat down and went back to my parts catalog like nothing had happened. The rest of the week, Sergeant G didn't bother me once. In fact, whenever he had instructions for me after that, he actually listened when I explained situations to him. Funny how that worked out. I was born in 1971, which means I don't remember any of this myself, but my parents told me this story so many times growing up that I feel like I lived through it. Back in 1973, my parents finally scraped together enough money for a down payment on their dream, a little ranch house out in the country. They were so excited. My dad was working 2 jobs to make it happen, and my mom was at home with me and my baby sister in this awful rental that had cockroaches and a landlord who never fixed anything. The small bank in town approved their mortgage, and they hired this contractor named Bob, who came highly recommended. The bank signed a contract to give Bob the money to build the house in stages as the work progressed. My parents thought everything was going to be perfect. It wasn't. Turns out Bob was taking on way too many projects all over town and leaving these completely incompetent workers to do the actual construction while he bounced around collecting money from everyone. The build started taking longer and longer. Weeks turned into months. And it wasn't just delays. The work was a disaster. The architect had left a straight line on the blueprints that he hadn't fully erased, and the framers actually built a wall right through where the bathtub was supposed to go. When my mom went to check on the progress one day, she opened the kitchen cabinets, and one of the workers casually mentioned that she shouldn't put anything heavy in them. She asked why, and he explained that they'd just attached them to the drywall with a few roofing nails through the back instead of securing them to the studs like you're supposed to. The garage door opening was framed so it faced into the living room instead of toward the driveway. My mom started crying when she saw everything. She called my dad at work, and when he came out to look, he was furious. They tried calling Bob, but he was never available. His secretary always said he was at another job site. The bank kept pressuring my parents to sign off on each phase so they could release more money to Bob. My parents kept refusing because nothing was done right. The bank's representative started getting nasty with them. He'd call my mom during the day when my dad was at work and bully her, telling her she was being unreasonable and that all houses have minor issues. He said if they didn't cooperate, there would be problems. My mom cried a lot during those months. My dad got really depressed. What was supposed to be this happy time of finally owning their own home turned into a nightmare. They were still stuck in that terrible rental with 2 little kids while their money was tied up in a house that was being built all wrong. Finally, the bank scheduled a final inspection. The representative showed up with this attitude like he was going to force my parents to sign the papers. My parents met him in the front yard and told him flat out that they weren't signing anything until the house was fixed properly. The representative got angry and started yelling about how the bank had already paid Bob a lot of money. He walked toward the front door, grabbed the doorknob, and pulled. The entire door, casing and all, fell right on top of him. It had just been wedged into place, not even nailed. After that, the bank finally called Bob and demanded he come supervise the work himself. Bob showed up, but he wasn't any better at building than his workers were. The problems continued. My parents still refused to sign off. That's when things got really ugly. The bank threatened my parents with foreclosure. Bob threatened to sue them for breach of contract because the bank wouldn't give him any more money until my parents signed off. My parents were terrified. They'd put everything they had into that down payment. If this turned into a long court battle, they'd lose everything. My dad found an attorney in town named Tom. They went to his office with boxes of paperwork, inspection reports, photos, lists of everything wrong with the house. The plumbing was a mess. The electrical work wasn't up to code. The tile in the bathroom was already cracking. My parents laid it all out for Tom, explaining how the bank and Bob had treated them, how they'd been bullied and lied to. Tom listened carefully and started going through the paperwork. My dad said he could tell from Tom's face that things didn't look good. Tom kept frowning and shaking his head. My parents started to lose hope. Then suddenly, Tom stopped. He picked up one document and stared at it. Then he smiled, really smiled, for the first time since they'd walked in. Tom told them he wanted to get everyone together for a meeting the next day. My dad tried to say they needed more time to prepare, but Tom insisted they trust him and meet tomorrow. So the next day, my parents, Tom, the bank's representative, the bank's attorney, Bob, and Bob's attorney all met at the bank. Everyone on the bank and Bob's side looked smug like they were about to steamroll my parents into submission. Tom didn't even let anyone else start talking. He stood up and said clearly that his clients had decided they no longer wanted the house and that it needed to be removed. The bank's representative actually laughed and asked if Tom had lost his mind. saying something about removing a house being absurd. Tom pulled out a deed and placed it on the table. With this dramatic flourish, my dad said, looked like something from a movie. He explained that my parents owned the land the house was sitting on outright, that they no longer wanted the house, and that everyone needed to get the house off my parents' land. Bob's attorney grabbed the deed and stared at it. Then he turned and stared at Bob, asking if Bob had really built a house on land he didn't own. Bob just nodded slowly, looking sick. The bank's attorney started yelling at the representative, demanding to know if the bank had really failed to finance the land the house was sitting on. The representative stammered that no, they hadn't financed the land. Tom said that everyone was trespassing on his client's land and that he expected the house to be removed and the land returned to its original state immediately. My dad said the silence that followed was beautiful. He watched everyone on the other side of the table look at each other with these completely blank expressions, like their brains had just short-circuited. The bank could foreclose on the house, sure, but what good would that do? They'd be foreclosing on a house that would have to be torn down and removed. Was no way to get their money back. They didn't even own the land it was sitting on. Bob was out the 50% he'd already paid for materials and labor, plus he'd be on the hook for tearing down the house and hauling it away. And the bank would definitely want him to repay the initial 50% they'd given him. Could they have gone after my parents anyway? Maybe. A foreclosure would have meant bad credit. My parents might have lost their down payment, but signing off on the house in its current condition would have meant spending thousands and thousands of dollars to fix everything from the roof to the basement before anyone could safely live there. The bank knew my parents didn't have that kind of money. They're the ones who had approved the mortgage based on my parents' income. Suddenly, the whole tone changed. Everyone started saying how my parents were wonderful people and how this was all just a terrible misunderstanding. Both the bank and Bob suddenly couldn't do enough for them. The house was brought up to the original specifications immediately at no extra cost to my parents. Bob had to eat the cost of fixing everything. My parents signed the mortgage. Bob got the rest of his money and just barely broke even on the whole project. The bank's representative was fired within a week. And Tom? He got paid his fee and gained one of his favorite stories to tell other attorneys for the rest of his career. My parents lived in that house for 32 years. Every time something needed fixing, my dad would joke about how at least it was actually attached to the studs this time. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.